Well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on what time zone you find yourself in. Thanks for joining us this morning. My name is Justin Razor. I am the Senior Account Executive for Nutanix, covering Native American tribes. And for Nutanix, that is really everything tribal related. That is tribal governments, tribal casinos, Bureau of Indian Education, Bureau of Indian Affairs. And today, the session that we're going to be talking about or doing as part of our Tribal Innovation series that we've been running for the last few months is embracing zero trust and security principles. And joining us today is actually Neil Ashworth, who will be the subject matter expert, if you will, for zero trust and security. And when we're talking about security, we're talking about malware, ransomware, and other exploits that for a lot of my customer base in the tribal space are very susceptible to. As we all know, there have been tribal casinos and tribal governments that have suffered from ransomware and malware attacks that have caused issues with their ability to do business and generate revenue for their tribal government and the members of that tribe. So Neil, I don't know if you want to go ahead and put up your presentation, share that out. Perfect. So yeah, I'm gonna, again, thanks for joining us today, and I'm gonna let Neil kind of go ahead and, well, actually, Neil, if you wouldn't mind just going to the roster. There you go. So again, I'm Justin Razor, the Senior Account Executive. Neil Ashworth is the security specialist, and I'm not sure if I nailed his title or not. Eric Katelfu, who is the senior sales engineer who supports me on the tribes team at Nutanix, in addition to Joanna Kershaw, who is an inside account executive, also part of the tribes team at Nutanix. And then Madeline, who a lot of you have probably spoke to, through email or phone calls, notifying you of this event. So again, thanks for coming and attending. And if you want to reach us on the tribes team, it's tribes@nutanix.com for questions, or if you want to have a more in-depth meeting about this specific topic or any of the other topics that we've covered during this Tribal Innovation series. All right, Neil, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Justin. Hello, everyone. I'm Neil Ashworth. I don't even know what my title is at Nutanix anymore. It changes. I consider myself a student of security more than anything. I enjoy learning about security and talking to customers about security. And so just put security something in front of my name, and that's really what I am. Justin, are you going to be able to admit all the people as they come in?
Yep, I'll Caitlin and myself will be able to admit as they're joining in. So yep, no problem there, man.
Okay, cool. So yeah, the title of today's innovation series is Embracing Zero Trust Strategies. Zero trust, if you're not familiar, is a concept. It's an idea of how to achieve security within your architecture. It's nothing new, really, but and I will expand upon how we align to those principles. But I think just an overall picture of the wider security message would be valuable to everybody on this call. So I'm probably going to speak a little bit about ransomware and malware in general, and about how we delineate in a private cloud consumption model the responsibility framework for securing platforms and data. And so to begin, I'd like to kind of go into the subject of how the IT landscape looks in today's world. And you could go into Google and do a search for ransomware, and there would be a myriad of examples that would come in front of you, and you could look into each one of those examples. I did this search just before Christmas, and these were the three search results that came back in no particular order. Well, this is the order that they came back in Google. The first was Foxconn, a global manufacturer, over $172 billion a year in annual revenues. And they were compromised by a doppelpayment variant of ransomware. and it caused them to have to take a great deal of services offline for a time while they tried to remediate that infection. The second issue that you can see on the screen is Maryland's GBMC Health, and they were forced to operate under EHR downtime procedures after falling victim to a ransomware attack by a hacking group known as Egregor. And so they just joined another host of healthcare delivery organizations impacted by ransomware cyber attacks recently. And then we have NetGain, who are a cloud hosting provider, and they were forced to take some of their data center infrastructure offline after an attack on November 24th of last year. Then having to communicate to their customers to expect outages and downtime of their cloud-based infrastructure. Now, on the surface of it, there isn't really anything that ties these three industries together, other than they all exist within frameworks of good cybersecurity practices. You can make the assumption that each one of these companies would likely have a very mature cybersecurity practice, and yet they were incapable of defending against a ransomware attack. And it took them, I would argue, a great deal of time. A week is a great deal of time to get to business resumption activities when you are at the scale of some of these companies. And so the process by which they managed to remediate and mitigate this infection is woefully inefficient. And it's principally because of the way we consider security on platforms today. So when you think about security, historically, we've always considered a perimeter-based approach to security. But with an ever-increasing adoption of hybrid cloud infrastructure, creating a security perimeter is almost impossible because applications have evolved past the limitations and restrictions of physical private data centers. And so these traditional methods of protecting these applications via perimeters is untenable because the perimeter is starting to become indefinable. So policy is the new perimeter. You can apply policy via access restrictions and social and security policy enforcement at a machine level, or even a microservices level. And so this new method of achieving security across a multi-cloud environment is actually more robust and more effective than a traditional perimeter-based approach. Although the perimeter-based approach still has its use, it can't singularly be focused as your best strategy to defend your infrastructure. And so today we exist in this difficult time to understand where to invest your dollars for appropriate cybersecurity and control measures to achieve that state of due diligence in your own IT security. And all these different products are vying for supremacy by advancing the complication of their platform, introduction of artificial intelligence and machine learning and stuff, and still exceptionally complicated platforms dealing with the single part of the silo of which they have visualization into, which is what makes hyperconverged infrastructure actually a naturally good foundation for solid cybersecurity practices. Because the tenants that are in play for a hyperconverged platform are tenants that we're trying to achieve in security as well. The removal of complexity towards a more simpler user interface, configuration management, and ongoing operation. Being able to leverage this capacity for built-in security that's ubiquitous and not being reliant on making sure that the customer adheres to your security guidelines. By the inclusion of these technologies, it effectively lowers your TCO. And so you may not necessarily need as many security tools as you're consuming today. Although there is still benefit for having a disparate security landscape within your architecture. So you're not entirely reliant on one single piece of technology to defend you against the threat of ransomware. But also this ability to react with agility and deliver scalability and performance in line with security concepts as well. At Nutanix, we're also very cognizant of the fact that security engineers, like most other people in the IT department, exist in a world of a great deal of complexity and a great deal of work. you can see the 7 tasks I've put on the screen here. It is no means exhaustive of the duties of a security and systems engineer in your own organization. They no doubt do a great deal more. But even just highlighting the fact that they have to be some sort of expert in network and firewall configuration, deployment, management, and operation, the deployment and monitoring of endpoint protection suites, providing and making sure that you stay on top of all your system security and OS security updates and patching, perhaps even getting involved in your data protection strategy, which maybe even get them involved in their business continuity and disaster recovery strategies, being part of that team, the planning team, and the execution team. Being responsible for all of your access management needs, be them local access management, doing Active Directory, forest domains and stuff, role-based access control, multi-factor authentication. There's a great deal of stuff they have to do there. And then on top of all that, annualized reporting of those system states to your audit and compliance frameworks, just to make that evidence be known that you are adhering to the following critical security measures within your own organization. A great deal of work. So being aware of this, it doesn't make sense for us as a technology company to further complicate this landscape. If we are to bring tools to bear that you can leverage in your own environment, these tools have to be useful. They can't overburden an already stretched security team. And so we stretch for this concept of invisible security. Just like invisible infrastructure, this marketing term we've adopted for the Nutanix platform, invisible security goes hand in hand with that, where we can provide security tools that are simple to deploy, to configure, to manage, that are intrinsic, just part of the platform, across all elements of the platform, and intelligent. And where possible, we'll leverage automation to alleviate the burden of human interaction on this method. So we can provide a node that self-heals from security deviations, where compliance checks are quite easy to export and remediate themselves if they fall out of alignment, and where we can apply dynamic-based policies on machines that exist quite ephemerally, in terms of being able to scale applications up and down to meet seasonal demand, or even just deprecate machines because they no longer suit your purpose, and policies that are applied to new machines as and when they're created without having to be cognizantly aware of making huge changes to your infrastructure. When we talk about security on a Nutanix platform, it's important for me to delineate 2 areas. And first, I'd like to talk about the platform plane of security, which is a grouping of 3 technology pieces: Nutanix AHV, our hypervisor; Nutanix AOS, our operating system; and Prism, the management interface. And so how have we hardened those aspects? Well, by default, a Nutanix node comes hardened out of the box. We use this process of system and security hardening, obviously much more nuanced than these 6 items would lead you to believe. The goal is the same, to attempt and prevent the possibility of executing vulnerable code by restricting methods to access certain systems. And the method by which we achieve that in a Nutanix node is by the use of STIGs, Security Technical Implementation Guides. Now, this is a term coined by DISA in 1998. We adopted it when we created the platform in 2011, and we adapted it to make it more useful for hyperconverged infrastructure. The adaptation was the inclusion of a check content field written in XCCDF XML language. Effectively, what this did is it allowed us to make these STIGs machine readable and consumable, so we can automate the process of applying them to a Nutanix node. We also had to align to a set of upstream controls. So the second thing we did is we adopted the NIST Special Publication 853, which is a special publication for federal information systems. And it's a guideline. It's a catalog of controls that you can apply to your environment, to the technologies you see fit. And so across our operating system and our hypervisor, there are over 700 STIG controls that help harden that environment. And so you can have that peace of mind that when you install a Nutanix node in your data center, it comes pre-hardened. To us, though, that was still a glass half full because your system's never as secure as the day you install it. Now, if we consider alternative methods to support our applications, traditional 3-tier infrastructure, for an example, you go through the installation process, and then it's incumbent upon you as a customer to consume, understand, and then apply the concepts that the vendor is trying to make you understand in form of hardening guides. This is typically in the form of hundreds of hours of personal operational security expenditure, or even professional services, a line item you never expected to have to pay for. You then go through a documentation of that baseline. This is typically involvement of, rounds of risk analyses and risk acceptances, because you couldn't quite manage to get every piece of every hardening guide from every vendor to work together. And so you potentially make compromises, and those compromises could come back to bite you later in life. But by any case, by the time it comes for you to try and accredit and use this system in a production environment, a period of months has no doubt gone by. Measuring the same process on a Nutanix node that comes intrinsically hardened is greatly accelerated. And it's accelerated because of the intrinsicity, I didn't say that word right, but you know what I mean, of security and hardening controls on a node. The glass half full scenario is 365 days later, when we come to accredit this system again, how can we be sure that it's maintained that security configuration state? Well, we introduced the use of a salt stack daemon that runs by default daily, called the Security Configuration Management and Automation daemon. You don't really need to know the name of it, but this salt stack daemon runs to help maintain security on a Nutanix node. It alleviates the chance of drift from your security AI posture to what can occur over time with administrators logging into systems and perhaps tweaking something so they can get something done. The SCMA sees any deviation and reverts that control back to a secure configuration state, providing a platform of self-healing from security issues. This goes deeper when we think about how we provided arguably one of the most secure, if not the most secure hypervisor available for private cloud consumption. When we set about building AHV, it was in response to a request from the DoD for us to support a KVM-based hypervisor with some adaptions. And because of the capabilities of RHEL and KVM at the time, we knew we had to build something bespoke so it could support enterprise applications like VDI. So that's how AHV was born. And because this hypervisor was built with web scale components in mind, rather than the traditional approach of hypervising machine, of using a hypervisor to virtualize machines under a shared SAN array or a shared set of components, we could fixate on a hypervisor that worked exceptionally well for web scale engineered products, for hyperscalers. And so that's really where we came about with AHV. Performance and security are keenly part of its DNA. And you can see that in our use of SE Linux, Security Enhanced Linux, which, to summarize effectively, it makes sure that all files, directories, and processes have a security context around them, and that those contexts then run in isolation. And so then a security enforcement module on the kernel either permits or denies access to those objects, such as the files and folders. So then that allows us then protections against vulnerabilities such as VM escape and hyperjacking that could be prevalent in other commonly used abstraction layers. We also take this further with Red Hat developed capabilities such as Exec Shield, which is a method of which to try and stop the propagation of worms and other remote attacks on Linux systems. Address space layout randomization, so we can't get exploitable memory cache from an active VM from a neighboring VM. And so there's a great deal of work that went into AHV to make sure it's an exceptionally secure hypervisor. I guess it's no surprise then that both Google and AWS have adopted KVM as a framework for their own hypervisors. And so then that helps us provide a means to provision to our customers an intrinsically secure platform plane that you can then apply and deploy your applications upon. And so in order to help provide protections and security in the data plane, we need to provide you applications with which you can leverage that further enhance the security of this zero trust architecture state. And part of that is robust micro-segmentation capabilities, data at rest encryption, real, true role-based access control bordering on the capabilities of attribute-based access control. But going further, we can provide a great deal of levity and elegance to the disaster recovery process, something that you're comfortable with testing regularly, and rich insights provided by analytics dashboards such as file analytics and objects analytics. So if we were to look at specifically the kill chain of a ransomware attack, we typically have an initialization vector, and these are often difficult to identify, but it could be one of the following vectors like insecure RDP configuration or email spam or some type of deceptive download, web injects, botnets, etc. The purpose of this initialization vector is to deploy some type of Trojan like Quackbot, also known as Qbot. Now, this Trojan is dropped on endpoints as a means to exfiltrate data, like perform key logging activities, capture browsing activity, saved cookies, maybe even pass login and password hashes and stuff. Utilizing this gleaned information from the Trojan, they can begin to do a form of AD enumeration, AD reconnaissance, using query tools that are in the command line so they can attempt to do some sort of privilege escalation. At which point they would attempt to get, using the information they've gleaned so far, do any type of lateral movement within the environment, either using compromised administrator accounts or a batch script to enable remote RDP or NetBIOS or SRB enumeration to identify the scope of the broadcast domain in which they are in. And then once they've achieved lateral movement, would begin the process of trying to exfiltrate data. Something simple like rclone, which has basically got the same utility as a Google Drive, such as where it can just begin to copy data from your on-prem instance to a cloud source. But with rcloud, you're able to do, an element of obfuscation of your activities. And then if you wanted to maintain access in order to try and continue to exfiltrate data before some type of ransomware execution, there are methods by which they could do a defensive evasion before finally executing the ransomware. Now, some methods of executing ransomware involve downloading custom dynamic link libraries, using bits admin and then executing them on the victim's machine to start encrypting data. Often, all the necessary files that are required for encryption are downloaded from a hosting server and then run as scripts. And so the best way for us to understand how to defend against these types of attacks is to understand the kill chain of those attacks. And so in order to try and impact the kill chain at the initialization vector, we can deploy spam and phishing tools, multi-factor authentication, training of your staff and resources, perform activities such as web filtering with next-gen firewalls, or even utilizing native Nutanix technologies like file analytics to spot spurious behavior or prevent the download of new files and folders that we know to be spurious. To interrupt the AD enumeration process, we can consider the use of PAM technologies like CyberArk and Thycotic, making sure you've got fairly robust policies and procedures around the protection of super user accounts that are exposed within broadcast domains, separation of duties, and even considering technologies like ID-based security, which is a capability of Nutanix Flow. To prevent lateral movement, we really only have a couple of tools at our disposal: macro and micro segmentation. Now, the issue when we consider the events that I called back from in Google, Foxconn, Maryland, GBMC Health, and NetGain is that they no doubt had an element of macro segmentation within their environment, the use of VLANs and network segments, and yet it was insufficient to try and isolate those infections to an acceptably exposed manner. Now, this is really where we can tie into zero trust architecture concepts, in that with micro segmentation, we are given much more latitude and specificity with regards to the security that we're applying at a machine level. If we're relying on trying to interrupt the kill chain at the data exfiltration and defensive evasion phase, we have tools available to us, such as data loss prevention tools and even micro-segmentation to prevent the exfiltration of file shares, for example. To identify defense innovation tactics, which typically use group policies to disable things like Windows Defender or on-prem AV and endpoint protection suite agents and stuff. And by being able to identify that activity by the use of an analysis tool like Ant-Files Analytics is important. It's also important that any on-prem passwords, when they are hashed, are also salted, so we can prevent the possibility of pass the hash style vulnerabilities. And also the use of a fairly robust and intelligent endpoint protection suite, hopefully with a very lightweight on-prem agent that would call back to some type of master server. And then finally, in order to provide a means of protection after ransomware has been executed in our environment, that is entirely predicated on your data protection policies. How many snapshots are you taking? Are you doing all of the steps prior to the ransomware execution phase in order to be able to fully identify the ingress point of that ransomware and backup from a clean backup? Using immutable backup sources such as worm-enabled object storage, which stands for write once, read many. Effectively, the best solution around recovering after a ransomware incident is in your recovery capabilities, how many snapshots you're taking and how available those are. If you're already doing all of this, then that's great. That should hopefully give you latitude to start exploring the use of proactive security measures, such as open source intel, using a threat intel platform, and expanding upon your current SIEM capabilities with the use of a security orchestration, automation, and response engine. So Splunk has Phantom Cyber, for example, which is a capability we actually use in Nutanix Corporate in order to do some of the automation pieces. And there's also some automation that you're able to perform within the Prism dashboard as well. And as long as those are in alignment with the MITRE ATT&CK framework, you should be in good standing. So considering what we've discussed today, this process by which malware can bypass your perimeter firewall through the use of obfuscation techniques, infect your endpoint, spread laterally, and before you know it, you've got a problem and you have no means of which to isolate and identify the scope of that problem. With a utility like Nutanix Flow, which provides a simple stateful layer 4 firewall distributed throughout your environment at a virtual NIC level, that same infection that bypasses your perimeter firewall and then affects your endpoint is isolated to that endpoint. We've incapacitated the malware by providing this whitelist only protocol across the broadcast domain, which subsequently prevents this malware from being capable to further affect things like file services and databases. And with a sufficiently advanced endpoint protection suite that can maybe make API calls, we can perform our frontline first measure quarantine capabilities, those activities that you would likely do as a security engineer to isolate the infection and then begin analysis. These are part of the capabilities of the platform to automate those processes. And then we're now turning Prism into a lightweight security orchestration, automation, and response engine. So how does all this play into zero trust architecture? Well, if you've read the new NIST special publication for zero trust architecture, it's the NIST 800-207. It's about 50 pages, I want to say, and it's a guideline of how best to address this issue of quite large, what they call implicit trust zones. If we think about the methods by which we would deploy protections in our IT environment today, they are perimeter facing. They are your edge point firewalls, the antivirus suites that are on the endpoints. They are access management controls, things like encryption. And I say that they still exist at the perimeter because these do not do any means of reducing the scope of your access within the environment once you've been authenticated. This process of challenge response mechanism is effective only enough to give you access to the entire infrastructure in many cases, or to a broadcast domain, which is a simpler method of trying to achieve restricted reach within an environment. However, when we're talking about zero trust, we're talking about applying the same level of trust that you apply to public platforms such as the internet to your own infrastructure. So trust nothing. So the application of zero trust architecture within your own organization is in the use of a myriad of different technologies. It's in use of robust identity access management controls, such as multi-factor authentication, single sign-on, tokenized access, rather than just a password username access method. It's in the use of technologies like microsegmentation, where we can isolate your reach within the environment. We're basically shrinking that perimeter to only provide access to those systems and servers that you need access to perform your daily duties. In the military, it's called need to know, and it's in the application of that need to know concept that zero trust really becomes understandable. And so we can see that within typical workloads that are deployed in any type of infrastructure, 3-tier or virtual or hyper-converged infrastructure, in that when we allowed servers to be deployed without any type of system hardening to them, there is a dramatic amount of open ports and protocols. When we apply a whitelist method to those same servers, where we only allow the communication pathways to exist necessary for proper application functionality, we see a dramatic reduction in the potential attack surface of those systems. This reduction in the attack surface is inversely aligned or directly aligned to a reduction of risk within your environment. And so our strategy at Nutanix to achieve zero trust architecture is the same strategy that we've been pushing since its inception. Methods of prevention, detection, and recovery. And so in the prevention bucket, we can group technologies like the use of role-based access control and identity access management frameworks, the use of technologies like flow and microsegmentation, technologies like Lifecycle Manager, which greatly facilitate an easier method by which to apply system updates, BIOS firmware. And so you're not having that attack avenue available to advanced persistent threats exploitable within your environment. When you consider like the Target exploit that occurred a few years ago, and then Arizona Beverages early last year, in each instance, the attack vector came from an unpatched system. And then also preventing the possibility of altering the data using an immutable data source. And so in the detection bucket, we have the capabilities to layer in service chain capabilities. So stateful layer 4 firewall is exceptionally good and simple at achieving isolation and segmentation within your environment. But let's say you wanted to apply a more deeper packet inspection capability. With service insertion for flow microsegmentation, you can deploy virtual appliances, next-gen firewalls within that framework. And so in the creation of a virtual DMZ, and then between the periphery, the border of the DMZ and your main environment, you can deploy next-gen firewall to conduct activities like web filtering, IDS, IPS, deep packet inspection activities. And then with Prism Ops and XPlay, which you would be more familiar with playbooks automation, we can begin to start leveraging the power of the platform to automate our response for detected spurious activity. Making sure that you're making good use of policy hit logs and event logs that are consumed by a syslog and then filtered and forwarded to a SIEM, such as Splunk or Logarithm, for use in support of a SOC, Security Operations Center. And then even potentially using Nutanix technologies for detection, such as file analytics that can spot some of this activity, such as in the example of Foxconn, where they were hit with doppelpaymer ransomware. Well, doppelpaymer ransomware changes the appendix of a file structure it's encrypted to .doppled. This is activity that can be spotted using our analytics engines and then filtered and forwarded into your first line response mechanism. And then finally, should the worst happen, you need a robust framework to recover data that may have been lost. And so with Nutanix hyperconverged infrastructure, we make it quite easy for you to conduct data replication and protection activities, making sure that this can form part of a regularly tested planning, automation, and a process within your own organization, and then integrating backups with a mutable data source that forms part of our prevent strategy. All of this can be articulated and consumed using a tech brief that I co-authored recently, tech brief on ransomware, which we can share after the event. And then the slide at the end kind of helps you better understand how each of the Nutanix technologies that are available can play into this overall strategy of prevent, detect, and recover. And since I've got a few more minutes, I'm just going to quickly talk about how Nutanix Flow specifically works. And so if you're already a Nutanix customer and you're already an AHV customer, the use of Nutanix Flow is for me a no-brainer. How it works is it uses AHV, our hypervisor, and then policy creation is done in Prism Central, which is a multi-cluster management control plane. And so we need a method, because this is software derived networking in a sense. We need a method by which to logically group your virtual machines together. And so in the example that we see here, this is a 3-tiered web application. This could be some type of payment application or whatever. We have to collectively group this application together with a common name. So we'll call this Payment Application 1. Payment Application 1 is made up of 3 tiers. So if I wanted to be exceptionally specific with the rules I'm creating in Prism Central, this would be the web tier for Payment Application 1, the app tier for Payment Application 1, and the database tier for Payment Application 1. I can now begin setting rules in Prism Central for Payment Application 1, whereby I only want to allow inbound web port traffic to my web tier. If I try and SSH into this tier, it will be blocked. If I try and ping VMs in this tier, it will be blocked. The only traffic that would be permitted is traffic over ports 80 and 443. Consequently, and subsequently, I can create a policy that then allows the web tier to speak to the app tier and the app tier to speak to the database tier. And I can also make sure that none of the virtual machines that exist in this tier are able to speak to one another, thus preventing the capacity for malware to spread laterally in this environment. And now, because all of these principles, these policies are applied at a machine level, it doesn't matter to us where this machine sits, either physically on a node or logically within a VLAN, because the policy is enforced at the VNIC via transmission through AHV. And so then this gives this application a certain level of dynamicism. It allows this application to be scaled up and down, because if those category values are applied to new virtual machines as they're created, and then those machines are deprecated, the policy itself is still applied to those virtual machines. These virtual machines can move because of a HA event and still receive the benefit of a centrally driven security policy that's applied at a VNIC. For advanced users, we have Security Central, which is a SaaS-based control plane in which can help you better understand the communication that's occurring within your virtual environment and help you group machines into logical categories. And then that greatly assists in the process by which you would then try and create security policies to secure those virtual machines. This is a separate session in itself, but it's also included in the Nutanix Flow license. And so you're getting a great weight of capability with a considerably easy to consume, easy to deploy, nothing to install capability for your Nutanix AHV suite of software. And so that's all I have for you today. I'm going to hand it back over to Justin.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. I appreciate it. So I hope what was covered there, was of interest to the people who joined this session. We had a really good turnout for this one. Again, I know that zero trust, malware, ransomware are all things that impact pretty much every tribal customer that I speak to. So, I hope understanding a little bit about how Nutanix is just an architecture is beneficial to organizations looking to greatly simplify not only just their traditional infrastructure needs, but also how they're applying security, or how Nutanix helps you really simplify that security posture as well. Because that's one of the things that I think Neil mentioned at the top that is really, really important to note, is that a lot of the ransomware and the malware attacks that we see happen are a lot to do with just having kind of disconnected or silos of IT that aren't being managed, to the best of their ability for securing them and hardening them, where we eliminate a lot of that complexity and a lot of that effort by just what we do naturally with Nutanix. And then you layer on things like Flow and Calm and the other products that really all complement those different kind of attack surfaces, or entries that Neil had mentioned through the session. So again, if the net of anything you take away from today from this session, it's that Nutanix greatly simplifies the management of your infrastructure, and also greatly assists and reduces the management of your security posture as well, or makes it easier to implement a better security posture is maybe a better way to say it. So again, this is the third session in our Tribal Innovation series. The previous ones were about simplifying automate database operations. Last week, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago now, we did a work from anywhere solutions for tribes. So really focused on VDI and end user computing technologies. And then next week, we are doing a session on protecting your apps, data, and services from downtime. So, kind of a nice next transition from this topic. We'll be talking a lot about disaster recovery, utilizing services like Leap, which is disaster recovery as a service. So I know a lot of tribes have challenges around, very small kind of physical footprints that their reservation or their territory is in. That doesn't really allow for them to have a true, geographically separated disaster recovery solution. So next week, when we talk about Leap, we'll be talking a little bit about how you can do that as a service with Nutanix, and still using the same management interface, so you're not having to relearn or re-educate people on how to have an effective disaster recovery solution. And again, if you've attended multiple of these sessions, you can receive a Nutanix swag kit. People who have entered or have attended multiple of the sessions will be able to be, entered to win a Apple AirPod Pro. And then, can you just advance the slide one for me, Neil? Thank you. Also, a lot of people probably found out about this series through Tribal Hub, or maybe you recognize TribalNet. And I invited some of the people from Tribal Hub to come and talk a little bit about some regional events that are happening in the different regions across the US over the next few months. This is something that they started doing last year. I think they've put a little bit more into it this year. I think there's more regions that they're covering. It's a huge benefit to anybody who's on this call that has maybe never been to a TribalNet, maybe isn't familiar with Tribal Hub, but they're a great organization to get hooked in with. And also attending one of these regional events is great because it connects you with your peers, in the tribal space. So Tracy is on from Tribal Hub, and I'll go ahead and let her, give a little bit of the background on these regional events.
Sure, thanks. Hey, Justin, thanks for having us on. Nutanix has been a great partner with Tribal Hub in all of our events over the last several years. No different with these 2021 regional events we have coming up. Actually, that first date, we decided to change that Southwest regional till the end of March. So don't worry about that one, but I put the link in your chat window here for all of the updated dates. But just after Nutanix wraps up this innovation series, the week following that, we have our first regional event for the California region. These are all happening virtually, of course. And we really are inviting anyone who works, in the IT space at tribes, tribal casinos, governments, or health centers, and your business executives. So anyone who's really at that decision-making level, we want you to have a seat at the table. It's really a great opportunity for you to connect with other tribes and have conversations about how people at other organizations are managing everything that's happening, in terms of technology advancements and all of the challenges that tribes are facing right now. So if you have any questions, I'll go ahead and put my email in the chat too. We would love to reach out to you and give you more information. As you can see, depending on the region that you're in, we've got all different dates throughout, hoping to go to Alaska this summer, but just take a note of those. Email me if you have any questions. And then of course we have our annual Tribal Net event too, that is happening November 8th through 11th, hopefully in person by then, and that will be in Dallas. And I can send you that link as well. So feel free to reach out. Again, thank you so much, Justin and Nutanix, for letting us come on and share this opportunity. We look forward to seeing any of you over there in just a couple of weeks.
Thanks, Tracy. Thanks, Tribal Hub. Yeah, Tribal Hub's a great partner of Nutanix. You know, they're huge at building a community of not only the vendors like myself, but also, you know, the people that are on, you know, that work with the vendors, the tribes themselves. So it's a great place for everybody to kind of come together, share ideas, what people are seeing, you know, in this very specific territory of Native American tribes, and figure out where things are headed and what's best. And I also wanted, since we have a few minutes here, were there any questions that, you know, anybody wanted to ask specifically about what Neil presented on during his presentation? While we still have him, feel free to unmute and, you know, ask any questions, or if you needed any clarification around anything. Give it a couple seconds here of awkward silence. I had a former life in radio, so dead air, it makes my skin crawl. All right, I don't see any questions, so I really appreciate it. This session will be put up on our Nutanix Tribes YouTube channel, where I've been putting all of these sessions. If you want to reach out to us, again, our email address is tribes@nutanix.com. And we hope that you can make the next session on our disaster recovery and protecting yourself from downtime series, which is next week, Wednesday the 3rd. So hopefully we see you then, and thank you very much for attending. Take care.